The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting a warm golden light over the fields that had been in the family for generations. The farm was not big, not even close to a commercial operation, but it was home. The soil had been carefully tended for decades, the fences repaired with love, and the small orchard planted by hands that knew the value of patience and care. Every morning the family would step outside to hear the birds calling, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, and the gentle lowing of cows waiting for their breakfast. It was a simple life, quiet, predictable, and full of small daily joys. Life on the farm was not without work. From before sunrise until the stars appeared in the night sky, there was always something to do. Animals needed feeding, crops needed tending, machinery required maintenance, and the land demanded attention. But the family found satisfaction in every task. Each chore was a connection to the land, a reminder that they were part of something bigger than themselves. The farm had survived droughts, storms, and market shifts, but it had always endured because of hard work, patience, and respect for the land. For years, nothing disturbed this rhythm. Neighbors were few and far between, and the farm felt like a private world, a place where life moved at its own pace. The children ran freely through the fields, learning the value of responsibility by caring for the animals in the garden. Evenings were spent sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills, talking quietly about the day, and making plans for the next. There was a deep sense of security and pride in living a life that was honest and connected to nature. Then came the first sign of change. A new road was being built nearby, and with it, a large resort had started to take shape. At first, it seemed like a distant thing, just a construction site that didn't touch the farm. But soon the farm's quiet world began to feel smaller. Trucks started rumbling past early in the morning. Construction crews were often working late into the night. And then, first glimpses of the resort's luxury homes and manicured lawns appeared over the horizon. It wasn't the resort itself that worried the family at first. What concerned them was the type of people moving in. One house in particular caught attention, a large, imposing property with white fences and perfectly trimmed hedges. And the woman who moved in there quickly became the talk of the local area. She was known for her strict adherence to rules, for being quick to complain, and for having a reputation for trying to control everything in sight. People whispered about her with caution, warning that she was the kind of neighbor who would make life difficult if she set her mind to it. At first, the farm's family tried to ignore it. They reasoned that as long as they stayed on their own property and continued living as they always had, there would be no trouble. The farm's routines continued. Animals were fed, the garden was tended, fences were repaired, and life went on in its quiet, steady way. But the woman, soon nicknamed HOA Karen by the locals for her tendency to file complaints about every little thing, did not respect boundaries. The first letter came one morning, slipping through the mailbox like an ordinary piece of mail, but carrying a storm inside. It complained about the smell from the farm, claiming it was offensive to the new community. The family read it in disbelief. The farm had always smelled like hay, manure, and fresh earth, the smell of life, of work, of nature itself. But apparently, this simple, honest scent of a working farm was now considered a nuisance. The letter demanded immediate action and threatened consequences if the issue is not resolved. The family tried to respond politely, explaining that they were running a legitimate farm and that these smells were natural and unavoidable. They hoped that would be the end of it. They were used to dealing with occasional complaints from neighbors, but this felt different. It was not a single misunderstanding. It was the start of what would become a relentless campaign. Soon after, more letters arrived. Each one seemed more aggressive than the last. One complained about the noise of the animals in the early morning, even though the farm had been home to cows and chickens for decades. Another complained about the farm's old fences, saying they were an eyesore compared to the new, perfectly manicured homes of the resort. There were letters about the barn, the equipment, and even the dirt roads that led to the farm. Each time, the family tried to remain calm, answering politely, providing explanations, hoping that reason would prevail. But reason was not what the woman was after. She wanted control. She wanted to impose her vision of perfection on the land around her, and she was willing to use every tool at her disposal to make it happen. Local authorities were called, inspectors were sent, and the family began to feel the first real pressure of her campaign. At times, it felt almost surreal. How could a place that had existed peacefully for so many years suddenly be considered a problem? Despite the stress, the family kept working. They continued their daily routines, feeding the animals, repairing fences, and tending the fields. But it was impossible to ignore the tension. The children noticed the worry in their parents' faces, and even the animals seemed unsettled by the unusual disruptions. Neighbors who once waved in passing began to offer sympathetic glances, warning the family to be careful. The farm, once a sanctuary, was beginning to feel like a battleground. The first in-person confrontation happened on a bright, warm morning. The woman appeared at the edge of the property, clipboard in hand, inspecting the farm as though it were a construction site instead of a home. She pointed out minor imperfections in the fence, the placement of the barn, and even the spacing of the trees. Her tone was sharp, her presence commanding. She told the family that their property was unacceptable and that changes needed to be made immediately. The family stood their ground. They explained that the farm had existed long before the resort, that every aspect of it had been carefully maintained, and that their work was essential to their livelihood. But the woman refused to listen. Her eyes were fixed on enforcing rules that did not even apply to their property. The encounter ended without resolution, leaving the family frustrated but determined to continue their life without yielding to unfair demands. As weeks passed, the situation escalated. More letters arrived, inspections were scheduled without warning, and rumors spread that the family might be forced to sell the farm. Each day brought new challenges, but also a growing determination. The family realized that they could not simply wait for the problem to go away. They began researching their rights, consulting with local officials, and learning about zoning laws and environmental protections. They discovered that their farm was legally protected in ways the woman had not considered, and this knowledge gave them hope. Still, the stress was real. Nights were restless, filled with worry about the next complaint or the next visit. Mornings began with anxiety, wondering what new demands might await. Even small tasks felt heavier, as if every chore carried the weight of scrutiny. Yet through it all, the family remained united. They leaned on each other for support. Finding strength in their shared history and their love for the land, the children continued to play in the fields, though more cautiously. They asked questions about the woman, about why she was making life so difficult, and about what could be done. The parents answered as honestly as they could, teaching lessons about resilience, patience, and standing up for what is right. It was a difficult balance protecting the innocence of childhood, while also preparing them for a world that could be unfair. But they managed it with care. And then came the first small victory. An inspection revealed that the farm was in full compliance with all local regulations. The letters and complaints, while annoying and disruptive, could not hold up against the facts. The family felt a surge of relief, though tempered by the knowledge that this was likely only the beginning. The woman had proven that she was relentless. The battle was far from over. Even as the farm continued its work, the shadow of the new neighbor loomed larger. The resort grew. Construction noises became a regular background sound, and the woman continued her attempts to impose her vision. Yet amidst the chaos, there was also a sense of pride. The family had weathered the first storm. They had proven that they could stand firm, defend their home, and remain true to their values. And in that resilience, there was hope aquiet. Enduring hope that no matter how difficult the days became, the farm would survive, just as it always had. As the sun set on another long day, the family gathered on the porch, watching the light fade over the fields. They spoke softly, reflecting on the challenges and the victories, and reaffirming their commitment to the land they loved. They knew that the days ahead would bring more trials, more letters, more confrontations. But they also knew that together, they could face anything. The farm was not just a piece of land. It was their home, their heritage, and their life's work. And no threat, no matter how persistent, could take that away. That night, as the stars sparkled overhead and the sounds of the farm settled into a gentle rhythm, the family felt a quiet confidence. They had faced the first wave of disruption, and had come through stronger. The farm, with all its imperfections and beauty, was still theirs. And for now, that was enough. The mornings on the farm continued as they always had, the smell of fresh hay and dew-covered grass filling the air. But now, a tension lingered that had never been there before. The family moved through their chores quietly. The letters and complaints from the new neighbor, known as HOA Karen, heavy in their minds. The first week after the initial letters had passed, they felt a small relief, thinking perhaps the storm had passed. But it was just the beginning. One Monday morning, the mail arrived heavier than usual. The mailbox, once a simple wooden post by the road, now carried a stack of envelopes from the HOA, each stamped and marked with official warnings. The first letter accused the farm of creating excessive noise before sunrise. Another claimed that the family's old barn, a structure held together by decades of care, was a safety hazard. The most troubling one suggested that the animals themselves might be a liability. To the neighborhood, the family read each letter carefully. They were used to handling challenges, but this felt different. The complaints were relentless and escalating in seriousness, yet they were often baseless. They were written with a tone that suggested an expectation of immediate compliance, as if the farm should be reshaped to fit someone else's dream, rather than its own history. Despite the frustration, the family decided to remain calm. They knew reacting in anger would only escalate matters further. Instead, they wrote polite responses, explaining the farm's operations and its compliance with all laws and regulations. But the polite approach did not deter HOA Karen. Within days, she appeared at the farm in person, clipboard in hand, her eyes scanning every corner as if she were inspecting a crime scene. She walked through the fields, pointing out the barn, the fences, the placement of the animals, and even the direction the trees grew. She asked questions in a sharp, demanding tone, clearly expecting the family to justify every choice they had ever made. The family listened patiently, answering each question with facts and calm explanations. They showed her records, permits, and everything that proved the farm was perfectly legitimate, even with all evidence presented. HOA Karen remained unsatisfied. She suggested changes that were unnecessary and unreasonable, like trimming trees that were healthy and old fences that had been maintained for years. She spoke as if her authority extended beyond her property and the resort she lived in, as if the farm had to conform to her rules despite its legal protections. The family realized that they were not just dealing with someone concerned about appearances. They were dealing with someone obsessed with control. Word began to spread about the conflict. Local neighbors who had once greeted the farm family warmly now whispered warnings about the woman. "Be careful," they said. "She never gives up." Despite their advice, the family refused to be intimidated. They believed that patience, persistence, and knowledge of the law would protect them. They continued working the farm, though every day brought a subtle tension. Each noise, each movement, even the smell of the earth seemed under scrutiny. The once peaceful farm now felt like a stage where every action was judged. Then came the fines. Letters arrived claiming the farm was in violation of HOA regulations, despite the fact that the farm was not part of the HOA at all. The fines were substantial, demanding immediate payment under threat of legal action. The family was stunned. How could someone levy fines on property they did not control? The letters were intimidating, full of legal-sounding jargon, and clearly intended to create fear. But the family did not panic. Instead, they took the letters to local officials and legal advisors to understand their rights. The response from officials was encouraging. They confirmed that the farm was outside HOA jurisdiction and that the fines had no legal standing. The family learned that HOA Karen was relying on intimidation rather than law, trying to pressure them into compliance through fear rather than authority. This knowledge was empowering. It reminded the family that while HOA Karen was aggressive, her actions had limits and could be challenged. Even with this reassurance, the stress was real. Each day brought new challenges. HOA Karen would sometimes stand at the edge of the property, watching the family work as if waiting for a mistake. One morning, she called the local building inspector, claiming the barn was unsafe. When the inspector arrived, The family calmly showed that the barn had been recently repaired and fully met safety standards. The inspector left, confirming everything was in order. HOA Karen left too, her expression tight, clearly frustrated that her attempt to intimidate had failed. The family found solace in each other. They leaned on their shared history and love for the land. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, sipping tea and talking quietly about the day. The children, despite noticing the tension, were allowed to play in the fields, to experience the farm as it had always been. The parents used these moments to teach lessons about resilience, patience, and the importance of standing up for what is right. They explained that life is not always fair, but fairness and justice can still be pursued. Through persistence and knowledge, the farm also found support in unexpected ways. Some neighbors who had initially stayed silent began to speak up, offering small gestures of help or advice. One neighbor offered tools when the barn needed repair. Another shared information about local zoning laws that could protect the farm. These acts of solidarity reminded the family that while HOA Karen was loud and persistent, she was not representing the whole community. Many people valued the farm and recognized its importance as a historic and working property. Despite these small victories, the tension continued to escalate. HOA Karen's demands grew increasingly unreasonable. She sent letters demanding the removal of old trees, the relocation of animals, and even changes to the natural flow of a small creek that ran through the property. Each demand ignored the reality of the farm, the needs of the animals, and the environmental protections in place. The family, however, continued to respond with patience and careful explanations. They documented everything, keeping records of letters, inspections, and communications. They were determined to protect their farm through knowledge and law, rather than confrontation. At times, the family wondered why someone would go to such lengths over property that was not theirs. They speculated about HOA Karen's motivations. Perhaps she was threatened by the freedom and authenticity of the farm. Perhaps she believed that control equaled power, and that imposing her rules would give her influence over everything nearby. Whatever the reasons, the family decided that understanding her motives was less important than protecting their own home. They focused on their work, on the animals, and on maintaining the life that had been built over generations. The farm continued to thrive despite the pressure. The crops grew, the animals remained healthy, and the fences held strong. Each day the family found small reminders of why the farm mattered. A calf born healthy, a tree that bore fruit despite drought, a sunset that painted the fields in gold. These moments strengthened their resolve, proving that life on the farm was resilient and that outside pressures could not easily break it. Then one day, HOA Karen took an action that surprised even the family. She organized a meeting with other neighbors, attempting to rally them against the farm. She painted a picture of the property as chaotic and dangerous, a threat to the aesthetic and safety of the new resort. The family attended the meeting, prepared to present facts and evidence. They spoke calmly, explaining their rights, their history, and the care they took in maintaining the property. They brought documents, permits, and photos, showing the farm in its proper context. The meeting did not go as HOA Karen had hoped. Many neighbors expressed surprise at her accusations, noting that the farm had existed peacefully for decades. They questioned why she would attack a family simply for living on their own property. Her arguments began to falter under scrutiny. It became clear that, while she was persistent, she was not universally supported. The family left the meeting with a sense of cautious optimism. They had faced her in public, with facts on their side, and had gained respect from the community. Despite this victory, the family knew the battle was far from over. HOA Karen was determined and unpredictable. They braced themselves for new challenges, continuing to document every interaction and maintain their routines. Each day, they balanced work with vigilance, knowing that resilience would be their strongest weapon. They continued feeding the animals, repairing fences, and tending the fields, all while keeping a careful eye on the letters' visits. In complaints that could arrive at any moment, the children noticed the tension, but they also noticed their parents' calm determination. They learned that life sometimes required standing up to unreasonable pressure, and that patience and knowledge could be more powerful than anger or force. They learned that even in the face of unfairness, it was possible to maintain dignity, to remain true to one's values, and to protect what mattered most. As the sun set each evening, the family gathered on the porch, reflecting on the day's events. They spoke quietly, acknowledging frustrations and celebrating small victories. They reminded each other that the farm was their home, their heritage, and their livelihood. No matter how persistent the challenges, they had the tools to defend it. Unity, knowledge, patience, and a deep connection to the land. The farm, despite the relentless pressure, remained strong. The animals thrived, the crops grew, and the land remained fertile. The family had proven that while outside forces could create obstacles, they could not destroy the life that had been carefully built over generations. Each challenge, each letter, and each inspection only strengthened their commitment. They had faced the first wave of opposition and had emerged resilient. The battle was ongoing, but they were ready, and so life continued on the farm. Each day brought new work, new challenges, and new moments of beauty. The letters from HOA Karen continued to arrive. The inspections and complaints persisted, but the family met each one with calm determination. They had learned that persistence, patience, and knowledge were powerful tools. They had learned that home was not just a place, but a life built with care and love. And they had learned that, no matter how aggressive the opposition, resilience and unity could protect what mattered most. The days on the farm were becoming increasingly tense. The family continued their work as usual, waking up before dawn to feed the animals, repair fences, and tend the crops. Every task was now performed under the quiet but constant pressure of knowing that HOA Karen might appear at any moment or send yet another threatening letter. Despite the weight on their shoulders, they refused to let fear dictate their lives. The farm was their home, their livelihood, and their heritage. Giving in was not an option. The family had grown more careful, documenting everything. They kept copies of letters, notes from meetings, inspection reports, and photographs of their property. Every fence repair, every animal feeding, every small improvement was carefully logged. They were not paranoid, they were prepared. They knew HOA Karen was relentless, and knowledge was their strongest weapon. It started with small escalations. HOA Karen began involving the resort management more directly, claiming that the farm was affecting the resort's property values.
Suddenly.
The family found themselves having to attend meetings they had not been invited to before. With HOA representatives presenting their case as if the farm had been a problem all along, the family answered calmly, presenting facts, historical records, and permits showing that the farm had existed long before the resort had been built. Despite their careful preparation, the family began to feel the emotional strain. Days felt longer, nights were restless, and even small setbacks weighed heavily. The children noticed the stress in their parents, asking questions that were hard to answer. "Why does she hate our farm?" One child asked quietly one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The parent took a deep breath, holding the child's hand gently. "Sometimes," they said, "people forget that others have lives and homes they must respect. It doesn't mean we are wrong. It means we have to be patient and stand firm." But patience alone would not stop the next wave of action. HOA Karen had decided to push harder. She began lobbying local officials, submitting complaints about zoning, water use, and safety, trying to find any legal loophole to force the family to change the farm or even sell it. The family received notices that seemed designed to intimidate demands for inspections, letters threatening fines, and notices of alleged violations. Each one caused a surge of anxiety, but the family did not falter. They meticulously prepared responses, calling on their knowledge of regulations, environmental protections, and property rights. One morning, the family woke to find several men from the county inspector's office standing at the edge of their property. They were there to conduct an investigation again at the insistence of HOA Karen. The family welcomed them, answering every question honestly and showing every relevant document. The inspectors walked the property carefully, examining the barn, fences, fields, and water sources. The family explained their operations, how the farm had been maintained, and how every aspect of it complied with regulations. By the time the inspectors left, they confirmed that everything was in order, but the tension remained. HOA Karen's attempts to create problems had failed, yet she did not stop. The family realized that her persistence was not just about rules or aesthetics, it was about control. She wanted to dominate, to impose her vision on a world that was not hers. It became clear that this was no longer just a matter of complaints. It was a campaign to pressure the family into submission. The family discussed their options carefully. They could fight, stand their ground, and document everything. Or they could retreat and risk losing what had been built over generations. They chose to fight, to strengthen their position. The family sought advice from local attorneys who specialized in property and zoning laws. They learned that HOA Karen's influence had limits. Her authority extended only to the resort properties and not to the farm. Furthermore, the farm had legal protections due to its long-standing operation and environmental considerations. Every meeting, every letter, every threat from HOA Karen could be countered with facts and legal standing. Knowledge became a shield as well as a weapon. Despite this reassurance, the emotional burden was heavy. Each day brought new letters, more complaints, and new threats of legal action. The family grew accustomed to reading the mailbox with a mix of dread and determination. They discussed each letter carefully, sometimes late into the night, planning responses and preparing for the next escalation. Through it all, they remained united. Drawing strength from each other and from the farm itself, the children began to understand the stakes, learning lessons about resilience, justice, and the importance of standing up for what is right. They participated in small ways, helping to document farm activities or organizing materials for meetings. The parents used these moments to teach lessons that went far beyond farm life lessons about perseverance, fairness, and the courage to face unfairness without losing integrity. One particularly stressful day came when HOA Karen attempted to involve environmental authorities, claiming that the farm's water usage was excessive and potentially harmful to nearby land. The family calmly gathered all their records: water usage logs, irrigation plans, and environmental reports. They invited inspectors to see the farm's sustainable practices firsthand. When the inspectors verified that everything was in compliance and that the farm operated responsibly, HOA Karen's claims were dismissed. Yet the effort required to prepare for this investigation took a toll. Leaving the family exhausted and anxious about what might come next, the family's resilience began to pay off in subtle ways. Neighbors who had been hesitant started offering quiet support, sharing knowledge, and sometimes even standing up in their defense. One neighbor, a retired local official, offered advice on communicating effectively with authorities. Another suggested ways to make the farm appear less intrusive to outsiders without compromising operations. These small gestures reminded the family that while HOA Karen's voice was loud, it did not represent the entire community. Still, HOA Karen continued to escalate, showing that persistence can often feel like a form of harassment when combined with power and influence. She pushed for zoning changes, attempted to claim parts of the property were violating regulations, and even pressured local media with complaints about the farm. Each move required the family to respond carefully, never reacting emotionally but always defending their property with facts and patience. The farm became a battleground, and each day was a test of endurance, both practical and emotional. One evening, after a particularly long day dealing with letters and calls from the HOA, the family gathered in the kitchen. The children were tired but curious, asking questions about why someone would be so intent on causing trouble. The parents explained that sometimes people let ambition, jealousy, or a desire for control drive their actions. They emphasized that while HOA Karen was persistent, she was ultimately accountable to laws and regulations that the family understood and followed. It was a lesson about life, fairness, and the importance of knowledge in defending oneself. The farm itself remained a source of comfort and strength. Animals thrived, crops continued to grow, and the land remained fertile. The family found small moments of peace in these successes: a calf born healthy, a tree that bore fruit despite drought, a quiet sunset over the fields. These moments reminded them why they had chosen to fight, why the farm mattered, and why patience and resilience were more powerful than fear. Even as HOA Karen escalated, The family's confidence grew. They knew that intimidation alone could not overcome truth, documentation, and legality. They prepared for each new challenge with careful planning, gathering evidence, and consulting experts when necessary. Each confrontation strengthened their unity, teaching them not only about their rights, but also about the value of standing firm in the face of unfairness. The months passed with ongoing tension. HOA Karen remained relentless, sending letters and demanding inspections. But the family's careful responses and solid preparation ensured that every complaint was met with reason and proof. The community began to see the situation more clearly. Many neighbors expressed quiet admiration for the family's courage and determination. While HOA Karen tried to portray the farm as a problem, the truth became increasingly evident. This was a family standing up for their home, their livelihood, and their heritage. One particularly challenging week involved a surprise visit from HOA Karen, accompanied by a contractor who claimed to assess property safety concerns. The family welcomed them, but quickly demonstrated that the farm complied with every applicable rule. The contractor could find no fault, and HOA Karen left frustrated, her attempt to intimidate failing once again. This small victory felt significant, a reminder that persistence, calmness, and knowledge could withstand even the most aggressive opposition. Despite these victories, the emotional strain never fully disappeared. Each day required vigilance, and every interaction with HOA Karen reminded the family that the battle was ongoing. They relied on each other for strength, sharing stories of resilience, reminding themselves of the farm's history and finding joy in small successes. Even in the face of persistent opposition, they cultivated hope, knowing that truth, preparation, and patience were on their side. The farm, despite the relentless pressure, continued to flourish. Animals were healthy, crops grew steadily, and the land remained productive. The family took pride in their ability to maintain the farm while defending it against unfair attacks. They had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. They had learned that knowledge, preparation, unity were powerful tools against intimidation. As the sun set each evening, the family gathered on the porch, reflecting on the day's events. They spoke softly about the challenges, the victories, and the lessons learned. They acknowledged the stress, but they also celebrated their resilience and the strength of their bond. They had faced persistent opposition, and though the fight was far from over, they knew they could endure. The farm was their home, their heritage, and their life's work, and no threat could take that away. By the end of Part 3, the family had proven that even against relentless opposition, they could stand firm. HOA Karen's escalating efforts had failed to break them, but she had made one thing clear: she would not give up. The family, however, was ready. They knew that more challenges were coming, but they also knew that they had the strength, knowledge, and unity to face whatever lay ahead. The farm remained a symbol of endurance, a place where life, patience, and hard work triumphed over intimidation and control. The farm had endured weeks of relentless pressure, and the family had grown used to the constant tension. Yet, even with their patience and preparation, they could feel the weight of HOA Karen's relentless campaign pressing down on them. Letters kept coming, inspections were demanded, and rumors spread in the nearby community about the farm's supposed violations. Every morning, they would check the mailbox with a mix of dread and determination, knowing that each envelope could contain a new challenge. Despite the pressure, the family continued their work. The cows still needed feeding, the chickens still needed care, and the crops needed tending. The land had a rhythm of its own, and no amount of outside interference could change the seasons or the soil. The family found solace in this constancy, in the simple truths of farm life. They knew that their work mattered, and that the farm was more than just land. It was history, livelihood, and identity, all wrapped into one. One day, a new letter arrived, with a tone more urgent than the rest. HOA Karen had escalated her complaints, suggesting that the family's water use and land maintenance were causing problems for the surrounding properties. She had involved environmental authorities, claiming the farm's operations were harming local wildlife and the ecosystem. The family read the letter carefully, noting the claims but also knowing from experience that they were exaggerated and baseless. They had records of water use, crop rotation, and sustainable practices that fully complied with regulations, determined to respond. The family contacted local environmental inspectors, inviting them to see the farm firsthand. They wanted the truth to be undeniable. When the inspectors arrived, they walked the fields, inspected the water sources, checked the fences, and observed the animals. The family answered questions patiently, explaining every detail of their operations. By the end of the day, the inspectors had verified that the farm was in full compliance with all regulations. The report was clear. The farm was sustainable, responsible, and legal. When HOA Karen received the report, she was stunned. Her plan to intimidate the family through regulatory pressure had backfired. Instead of creating fear, she had exposed herself to scrutiny. The inspector's findings made it clear that her claims were unfounded. The family quietly celebrated this small victory, knowing that it was a turning point. They could see now that persistence alone could not defeat them. They had the truth, and the truth was on their side. The community began to take notice. Neighbors who had been silent or hesitant to speak up now expressed support for the family. Some shared their own experiences with HOA Karen, counting how she had tried to impose her will in ways that were unfair or even illegal. Others offered practical help, from lending equipment to providing advice on legal procedures. The family felt a renewed sense of hope. They realized that while HOA Karen was loud and determined, she was not universally supported. Many people valued the farm and recognized the injustice of her actions. Meanwhile, HOA Karen did not stop. She continued to send letters and make demands, but her efforts were increasingly ineffective. Every time she tried to escalate the situation, the family responded calmly, with evidence and documentation. Her credibility began to weaken. Local authorities and neighbors could see that she was acting aggressively without justification. The family's patience and careful preparation were turning the tide. In their favor, then came the unexpected moment that shifted everything. During a routine visit from local officials, it was discovered that the resort, which HOA Karen had proudly aligned herself with, had several violations of its own. Environmental concerns, unauthorized construction, and water management issues were uncovered. The resort, which had tried to appear perfect and orderly, was now under scrutiny. HOA Karen's attempts to target the farm had inadvertently exposed weaknesses in the very organization she had supported. The family watched as the situation unfolded with a mix of astonishment and quiet satisfaction. It was not vengeance. It was simply the result of truth and transparency. The resort faced fines, halted construction, and public criticism. HOA Karen, who had thought she was acting from a position of authority, was now facing embarrassment and scrutiny herself. Her relentless campaign against the farm had exposed her own association with an organization that was failing to meet standards. For the first time, HOA Karen seemed uncertain. Her confidence, once unshakable, wavered. The family noticed subtle changes in her behavior. Letters became less aggressive, inspections were postponed, and her presence in the community became less prominent. It was clear that her actions were beginning to backfire. The farm, which she had tried to control and diminish, was now standing firm, its legitimacy unquestioned. While her influence was diminishing, the family continued their daily routines, but now with a sense of cautious optimism. They were still vigilant, knowing that HOA Karen could try new tactics, but the balance of power was shifting. They felt a quiet pride in their ability to endure, to remain calm, act, and to rely on facts and law rather than anger or confrontation. Each day that passed without disruption reinforced their sense of stability and security. The children noticed the change as well. They saw that their parents' determination and calm had tangible effects. They learned that standing firm with truth and patience could overcome aggression. They also learned that actions taken without knowledge or fairness could have consequences, even for someone as aggressive as HOA Karen. The lessons extended beyond the farm. They were lessons about life, fairness, and the importance of integrity. The community continued to play a role. Neighbors, encouraged by the family's perseverance, began to speak more openly about their experiences with HOA Karen and the resort. Local media, which had been hesitant to cover the situation, now reported on the environmental violations and the challenges faced by the farm. Public attention shifted, highlighting the resilience of the family and the unfairness of HOA Karen's actions. The farm became a symbol of endurance and justice, admired by many for standing up to intimidation. HOA Karen's frustration grew. Every attempt to assert control now seemed to produce the opposite effect. Her letters were scrutinized, her complaints dismissed, and her credibility questioned. The family, however, remained consistent. They responded calmly, documented everything, and relied on the law to protect them. Their actions were deliberate, careful, and unwavering. The contrast between their patience and her aggression became increasingly evident to all who observed the situation. One particularly tense week involved another attempt by HOA Karen to involve local authorities, claiming the farm was obstructing property lines and causing drainage issues. The family prepared meticulously, gathering documents, maps, and photographs to show that the property boundaries were clear and the farm's operations were lawful. When inspectors arrived, they confirmed the family's claims and dismissed HOA Karen's complaints. Once again, her plan had backfired, reinforcing the growing sense that her efforts were doing more harm to her reputation than to the farm. Despite the ongoing tension, the farm itself thrived. The animals remained healthy, the crops continued to grow, and the land flourished under careful management. The family found solace in the constancy of nature, the rhythms of farm life, and the tangible results of their hard work. Each sunrise and sunset reminded them that life continued, that the farm was resilient, and that their persistence was paying off. Evenings were spent together, reflecting on the day's events and sharing quiet moments of joy. The children played in the fields, learning not only about farm life, but also about courage, patience, and integrity. The parents continued to teach lessons about resilience, about standing up for what is right, and about maintaining dignity in the face of unfairness. Each day brought challenges, but also opportunities to reinforce the values that had guided the family for generations. The farm became more than just a home. It became a symbol. It represented endurance, truth, and the power of careful, persistent action. HOA Karen's relentless attempts to control and intimidate had ultimately exposed her own misjudgments. The family, through patience, preparation, and integrity, had not only protected their home, but also revealed the flaws in the system that she had relied upon. As the months passed, the situation began to stabilize. HOA Karen's influence waned, her complaints lost momentum, and the resort faced increasing scrutiny. The family, while remaining vigilant, could finally take a deep breath. The farm had survived, stronger and more secure than before. The lessons learned during the conflict about resilience, patience, and the power of truth would stay with the family forever. In quiet moments, the family reflected on the journey. They had faced relentless pressure, baseless accusations, and aggressive tactics, yet they had endured. They had relied on knowledge, preparation, and unity, and these had proven more powerful than intimidation. The farm remained a place of life, work, and joy. Untouched by the attempts to control it, HOA Karen, once confident and unyielding, had learned a harsh lesson. Her relentless pursuit of control and perfection had backfired, exposing her misjudgments and weakening her influence. The family, meanwhile, had demonstrated that resilience, patience, and integrity could overcome aggression and intimidation. The balance of power had shifted, and the farm's future was secure as the sun set over the fields. Casting a golden glow over the land, the family gathered on the porch, reflecting on the victories, the lessons, and the enduring strength of their home. They knew challenges might still arise, but they had proven that truth, preparation, patience could withstand even the most persistent opposition. The farm had endured, and in that endurance lay a quiet, lasting triumph.